Hi everyone, welcome to this session of DEMOFEST, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Proof of Concepts with Tony Matos. DEMOFEST is hosted by Consensus. We help pre-sales teams scale with intelligent demo automation. We are recording this session and we'll be posting links to the recordings in about 2 weeks in the Scaling Pre-sales and Sales Engineering LinkedIn group. So we encourage you to join that group to be able to access those recordings. I'll paste a link to that group in the chat window in a couple of minutes after we get started. I'll also paste it in that chat box again near the end, just in case you miss it the first time around, and it can be difficult to scroll through the chats to find it again. Also, as a quick note, we'll have a short Q&A at the end of this session. So if you do have any questions that come up along the way, feel free to post those in the Q&A section. We'll try to get through as many as we can for you. Tony is a solutions-focused senior executive with more than 25 years of success in the computer software industry. He initially began a career within IT in the financial service industry. Tony's worked with leading enterprise software organizations, including Siebel Systems, Business Objects, SAS, and Citrix. And he has experience in building high-performance teams and applying best practices that reduce the busy work of pre-sales roles. His broad areas of expertise include sales, engineering, management, marketing automation, and building strong teams. So without further ado, we'll hand it over to your presenter, Tony Matos.
Well, thank you, Brian. Let me just get the screen going here and we can get started. All right, I hope everyone can see the first slide, 7 Habits for Highly Effective Proof of Concepts. So my name is Tony Matos, and I currently serve as the Sales Engineering Director for Citrix in Canada. Like many of us today, we're probably in our home office. So if you hear my dog barking, it's because she still doesn't trust all the delivery drivers coming to our home these days. Just for context, I live outside of Toronto, Canada, in an area known as the Golden Horseshoe. That means I live midway between the city of Toronto and Niagara Falls. Some of you probably know where that is. I also live beside something called the Bruce Trail, which is actually a trail stretching about 550 miles all the way from Niagara Falls to a little bit of northern Ontario in an area called Tobermory. It has lots of parks, picnic areas, hiking, biking, and walking paths. And these days, given our current situation, that's a welcome distraction, as well as the many golf courses we have. As Brian said, I have been able to have the privilege of working at some outstanding organizations, which he listed. And anyway, that's a little bit about me. Thanks for joining this session on how to improve the proof of concepts. So welcome. I believe that as sales professionals, we want to be acknowledged for doing great work. So whether that's delivering a great demonstration or working with our customers to architect a solution, I know I've always wanted sort of the stamp of greatness attached to my work and efforts. And I believe that this is a mindset and attitude of any world-class pre-sales professional, because they want to excel at what they do. They want to be the best at what they do. But there are many activities that a sales engineer has these days. Managing a POC remains a staple. It's an activity that really should help us have a customer understand the value and capabilities of the great solutions that we represent in our organizations. So when a POC is done well, it can be a vehicle that drives value and helps move the needle towards getting that all-important win. And a POC should be used to capture a customer's imagination so that they see their business requirements being met within the context of your solution. But we all know that great doesn't just happen. You need to plan the work and work the plan, as the saying goes, and remain focused on improving your skills. Like most things in life, we have to practice them, doing the drills and working on fundamentals. Practicing is all about showing up and doing the right drills off the field so that we're on the field of play, we actually perform well. And so it's in this spirit of practice that I want to share what I've learned and what I believe has helped me and others to improve conducting a proof of concept. So I once had a pre-sales colleague tell me that they could write on many topics related to sales engineering except this topic. They said that writing on this topic would actually drive them bonkers. I'm pretty sure if he had written a book, he would have done a great job. But in my pre-sales career, I know that some POCs actually did drive me bonkers. The reason being is that I really didn't manage them well. So much of the content that I'm presenting is really based on my experiences. Some have been good, some have been bad, and some have been outright ugly. But with my desire to understand and improve things, I've sought to always fine-tune to see how I could do a POC better, amongst other of my pre-sales activities and tasks. I would imagine that any sales engineer who's listening, you have either had or will have dozens upon dozens of POCs during your career. Since, as I mentioned earlier, SCs want to do great things, we often have to learn how to improve a POC process. Now, managing a POC is an essential skill similar to other pre-sales activities, like managing an RFP, like doing discovery, managing your time with multiple sales reps, and of course, conducting effective demonstrations. I knew early in my career when I started many years ago that if I did POCs badly, it could lead to a short pre-sales career. So once again, I had to improve. So over time, I've developed some approaches and practice that I believe that have helped me improve. And not only improve the how I did it, but also how I thought about a proof of concept. So as I sought to improve how I managed the POC, I began to keep track of what worked and didn't. Over time, this has developed into a set of practices and perspectives. I know I'm speaking to an audience that knows what a proof of concept is, but let me offer a simple definition. I define a proof of concept as a collaborative engagement with a customer. It's designed to move an opportunity forward. It's where a customer can see your solution illustrated in a contained and managed environment with a defined set of success criteria. I believe that a well-run POC needs to be characterized by four things: clarity, relationship, orchestration, and this mentality to win. So what I mean by that is that a POC should be clarifying and not confusing. Specifically, a well-run POC should bring clarity to a customer so that they can see how your technology, team, and culture are the right fit for them. It can also and should be used to grow a relationship with a customer. I believe that a POC can and should be used to develop a better or even deeper relationship. It's really not just about the technology exercise that is often the focus of a POC. As with most things, but specifically with a POC, it should be well articulated, documented, understood, and managed similar to a project. I believe that a well-orchestrated POC elevates the perception of your organization, solution, and team when it's done well. And of course, the goal of any POC should be to get that technical win, and beyond that, getting the win associated to the opportunity. We shouldn't be doing a POC for fun, research, or other objectives. We really do want to get that win so that we can close the opportunity. So in my experience, I've found that the best POC is the one that you don't have to do. But we know that we always can't avoid doing proof of concept. There are valid reasons for that arise both from a customer, but also can arise from the sales team. depending on the sales strategy around a certain account or opportunity. However, I hold that a POC should be used only if it fits clearly within an articulated account strategy. It shouldn't be used to fill time or as an extended demonstration. If a POC is done poorly, it can actually erode your standing with a customer. Now, we all know that the short form of POC stands for proof of concept, but I think it should also stand for purchase order coming, meaning that a POC should move the needle towards a win. My point is that we really need to leverage a POC to move that needle on a decision that's connected to an opportunity that's part of your quarterly deal pursuit. I have seen that sometimes POCs are used as a filler or a way to prove that there's activity in the account. And I believe we introduce risk when we hold such a low opinion of what a POC is and how it can be actually used to move a deal forward. Now, in this session, I'm going to be focusing more on what I call the mindset around a POC versus the actual mechanics of executing a POC. And what I mean by mindset is this, or sorry, mechanics is this. Mechanics are more about the framework or methodology we actually use to conduct a POC or actually do it, while a mindset are some of these established attitudes that we hold or their values or guidelines around a POC. Now, while our focus is on the mindset, if you're looking for information on the mechanics, I am introducing a book later this summer. And in there, I sort of get into more of the mechanics, how to qualify, define, execute, and close a POC effectively. And we've been able to field test these approaches and techniques and templates and methodologies in a large organization. But enough about that. Let's get to the 7 habits. So as I mentioned, my focus is more on the mindset, the attitudes that we hold. Much of what I'm going to present is really about how we think about a POC. A saying I often have to remind myself is that my attitude can determine my altitude. And so here are the 7 habits that I'd like to go through. I'm going to go through them quickly in the time that we have, and hopefully this will provoke some dialogue and discussion and curiosity in terms of how we can improve and further the value of a POC from a sales engineering perspective. So let's move to our first habit, shall we? Okay, the first habit is asking why. The reason you ask why is to help qualify why a POC is required. Now, this might seem like an overly simple habit, but the reality is that many POCs get agreed to without understanding the effort required, or even worse, what success looks like to actually get that technical win. Now, recently, there's been a lot written about the topic of why these days. Simon Sinek published a book entitled Start With Why, where he introduced the golden circle. In the golden circle, he places why at the center. Now, this is because knowing the why about something or yourself, or in this case, a POC, allows you to then have the context and insight about how you will do something and what you will do after that. But if you lack that initial understanding of why you're doing something, the how and the what can get a little bit lost. So we first start by asking why before we lift a finger to mouse or fingers to keyboard to begin work on a POC. I found that most sales engineers, including myself at times, that we simply need to pause, take a breath, and avoid the inclination to say yes to a POC right away. I know in my head when I've been in that situation, I can just think about how I'm going to do it from start to finish. But what I've learned is just because I can do it doesn't mean that I should do it at least right away. So it's important to take time to, as a sales engineer, to understand why a POC is required by asking simple and, of course, intelligent questions. It's important to know why, because a POC is by its very nature expensive. That is, they take time to qualify and define and to execute. They require time from your technical team as well as the customer. So there is very much a cost to running a POC. It's really not free in any way. As a matter of fact, it's quite expensive when you add up all the people and resources and effort that go into it. Now, some people hold that a POC is a right, but I believe it's much more of a privilege to conduct a POC. The fact is, a POC needs to be justified given the investment that it often requires. We need to value a POC as a sales lever to influence a customer. So we need to count the cost of doing a POC. How? We start with why, so that we have a basis for our investment and, of course, the intended outcomes that we want. So habit 1 is all about asking why. That's from this we get the benefit of when we practice this habit, that it ensures that the sales team and the customer have a common understanding about why doing a POC makes sense for both parties. Habit 2, discover. The habit of discovery is about pausing to invest time to learn about your customer, including the people, processes, and technology that are involved with the engagement. Now, I found that this habit for me was one of the hardest to put into practice. I'm inclined to take action on things in general, and that tends to work in many areas, but oftentimes it worked against me in some of the POCs that I was involved with. The way that I improve this habit of discovery was to tell myself that it's okay to be curious. I find that being curious leads to asking questions, and that leads to further discovery and learning. So this is how I remind myself and work on this habit of discovery is I need to value or know that there's great value in discovery, that I should discover all that I can before I can actually start doing the POC. Again, avoiding that, that inclination to get started right away. I also have to remind myself that it's okay to take time to learn more, to not make assumptions because it looks similar to another POC. And also that just because I can do something well doesn't mean I should rush into it and do it right away. Now, I found with this habit that there's another benefit, and the benefit is that I believe that it shows respect or further respect to the customer. No customer wants to have a sense that they're not being listened to, by this statement. Oh, this POC is just like all the others that we've done. Now, there is an element of truth to that. Obviously, based on our expertise, we want to leverage what we have done in other engagements for the current POC that we're working on. But in some ways, that statement gives confidence to the customer and helps them realize this isn't our first rodeo. But as a sales engineer, we need to guard against an underlying attitude behind that statement, which is that it may shut down our inclination or habit to do further discovery and get that insight. So we need to be careful to stay open. So what I tell myself is, Tony, before you want to spark up all those servers, pause, invest time to discover what needs to be done and ask questions and stay curious. I've found that the benefit we get from practicing this habit of discovery is that we gain by hearing what the customer is telling us that we don't know and that they do. And so gaining this information will influence how we view, but also approach each proof of concept. Habit 3. This is the habit of making it your goal to understand your customer's business focus, because it's essential so that you can position your solution not just from a technology perspective, but also from a business context. Now, having this focus on your customer's business objectives is often given less airtime versus the overwhelming focus placed on the technology elegance of a particular solution that we're putting forward to address customers' requirements. Now, as sales engineers, we're motivated and incented to ensure we position our technology well, and we should continue to do that. However, I also believe that we need to pause and ensure that we understand the overall business context in which this solution that we're proposing in a POC actually will live and operate in. Now, I know that we all work for great organizations with great solutions, but we also know that sometimes the best solution doesn't always win. Now, there are lots of reasons for that. But in the context of a POC, I believe that one factor for that occurring is that we don't apply enough focus on the business goals or context or objectives and how our solution enables that business context. So as sales engineers, we need to keep focus on aligning our solution capabilities to our customers' business objectives, their values, their outcomes, and even aspirations. And I think when we do that, I believe that our overall value proposition for our solution and our approach actually grows stronger. As sales engineers, we're tasked and measured on being technically competent. But sales engineers should also ensure that they understand the business context that this solution will live in. When we have both that technical and business understanding, I believe that it also helps us differentiate ourselves from the competition. Now, when it comes to defining this business value or understanding the objectives or the context that I'm describing, one of the things that I always tell my team is don't ever write that out yourself. And the last thing you should do is actually go to our marketing site and find a definition for our marketing materials. Nothing wrong with our marketing materials. But what I found is that really what's best to sort of come to this understanding is getting that definition and that scope and that written business understanding from the customer. In fact, one of the things that we do quite well is we actually ask our customers to actually write out what their business objectives and aspirations and requirements are. And although that sounds very simple and straightforward, but having it written by them in their own language, in their own context, becomes a really valuable asset during the POC, because it's something that you can go back to and refer to. So in this habit of keeping business focused, the benefit we get from practicing this habit is that we really get underneath to understand the customer's business objectives. So it allows you to place your POC in a broader business context, not just a technology context, which sometimes is the case. Habit 4, I've labeled essentials, and this is about the discipline of sticking to the essential elements of the POC that allow you to complete it in a timely and impactful manner. Now, I find for this habit, I'm going to borrow from the minimalism movement. Minimalism is a growing social trend that seeks to focus life to what they call the essentials. They tend to be stereotyped as people who only own one thing. So whether that's one t-shirt or one pair of jeans or one leafy plant from IKEA. That's a little bit of a false view, even though I know some people do practice it that way. But a better way of understanding minimalism is that it seeks to remove things that aren't essential, specifically removing things which distract us from being focused or living well. Now, you might have heard or even watched Marie Kondo and her TV show and her approach to uncluttering your home. Now, one of her famous sayings is that if something in your home doesn't bring you joy, then it's okay to part with it. And I believe we should practice a measure of that in a POC. And by that, I mean, I think there's some things that we do or even agree to in a POC that bring little joy. And now joy isn't the purpose of a POC, but if you were to change joy to bring to value, then I think that would take on a different dimension. There are things that we agree to, that we do in a POC, which bring little value. And I think the reason we need to have this mindset, or thinking, is we need to stick to the essentials so that we manage something that happens very often within a POC, and that's scope creep. And scope creep can come, as we know, from the customer, but also the sales team. Now, one of the ways to avoid scope creep is to keep a POC lean to only the necessary elements, which allow you to illustrate your solution. As a sales engineer, you need to stay vigilant and avoid requests which detract or derail a POC from being successful. Now, I realize saying this that we don't live in sort of a black and white world, and it takes insight and diplomacy to handle the many requests that come during a POC. I don't know about you, but I've found that every so often there's a personality that I refer to as the see more personality. I think you know who I'm speaking about. It's that person who's always asking to see one more thing, or could you show me one more thing in a POC? Now, I actually believe that I understand the underlying reason as to why that occurs and why we have people like that in an organization. Everybody is naturally curious about what a solution could do. But from a sales engineer perspective, it's very important that you manage that personality or that desire for the customer to see everything. It's important to keep the POC on track so that it completes in a timely but impactful approach. So this habit of keeping to the essentials is important to come to the finish line. Now, as a side note, I would highly recommend Greg McKeown's book called Essentialism. It's actually one of the better expressions of the minimalism movement, but from a business and professional content. So if you're interested in that, Greg McKeown's book, Essentialism, you can find it on Amazon, of course, and other book sites. So the benefit of this habit of essentials is that it ensures you, as the sales engineer, stay focused on knowing and completing the essential elements of a POC. This allows you to stay on course to ensure that you get to the best outcome in the shortest timeline, so that you have the opportunity of closing and hopefully winning the opportunity related to the POC. All right, just a couple more. Habit number 5, the habit of knowing what the outcomes of a POC are is about gaining insight into the bigger picture of what your customer wants to accomplish. Now, an outcome is defined as the way a thing turns out or a consequence. And every customer has an intended outcome or consequence for implementing a solution. And that's why they often ask for a POC, is they want to experience what those outcomes and capabilities are. And I believe it's our responsibility as pre-sales professionals to know what those outcomes are. Now, early in my career, I can say I wasn't always interested in knowing a customer's outcomes. The reason was early in my career, I think I was just too focused on the technical stuff related to the POC. Now, this sometimes worked out. But then other times I would do all the technology stuff really well and the POC went badly. I think thinking back, I realized that although I did all the right techie things, that the customer couldn't always relate to them. That is, they had no connection with all that great technology stuff and how it really impacted or changed or moved the needle for them in terms of improving their processes or their approach, or their ability to do something with our solution. So the question is how do we sort of get a larger or expansive view that gives us understanding into what the broader outcomes and aspirations are from our POC stakeholders? And I think that comes by asking questions. Now, I realize that the scope of questions will vary based on the solution and industry and such, but here are a few that I tend to use, which help me, if nothing else, provoke a discussion and sort of begin this understanding to know what the broader outcomes or perspectives are from a customer. You know, some of the questions that I ask is, you know, what business capability or change is this aligned to within or outside your department? What has changed that requires this new investment? Who is most impacted by the solution, and how will their role be changed or impacted? Who drove the decision around a POC being required to look at a new solution? How does it fit? Is it a departmental initiative, or is this a larger or broader corporate initiative? Who and what is being impacted today by not having this type of solution in place? How long has this been going on, and who has the most to gain? Now, none of these questions are unique, and we've all asked these types of questions before, but I think it's in asking these and other questions that we gain the insight into the larger outcomes of the solution that a customer intends to implement. Now, I realize that there are always larger issues at play in every POC. Sometimes a department just needs to modernize or change what they're doing, and that is contained to just that one fact. But I think there's always value in asking to ensure that as a sales engineer, we make sure that there isn't a larger context beyond the definition and requirements of a POC. So habit 5, outcomes. The benefit that I believe that we get from practicing this habit of knowing our customers' outcomes is that we get to understand the larger context of a customer's objectives and goals so that we can further align the value of the solution that we're proposing. Habit 6, as I've labeled it, captivate. The habit of captivating is about the value of capturing the overall experience of the POC so that you can tell a compelling story. Now, to incorporate storytelling into a POC, you need to capture, and in essence, keep a history of the POC from start to finish. The reason being that without capturing what's said or done, what worked, what didn't, how excited or sometimes disengaged the customer was during the POC, you won't be able to tell a compelling story when the POC actually comes to a close. And by a close, I mean when you've done all the heavy work of actually completing the POC from a technology perspective. Now, early in my career, I didn't consider the value of storytelling as it relates to a POC, but got a few years behind me, and now I see the value of storytelling in general, especially when it comes back in playing back the success or the success of the POC after all the work is done. Now, once the POC ends, we tend to hold something called a POC key findings meeting, and you may have something similar. It's in this meeting that we actually play back what we did and how successful the POC was to the customer. It's an actual face-to-face, or these days a video-based meeting, where we're actually there to sell the value of how and what we did. And of course, it's really a call to action meeting where we're believing and having evidence that our POC was successful, and we're there to actually ask for the business. So in that context, if you lack this storytelling element, you can fall short of getting across the full value of the POC. Now, you can leverage storytelling throughout the entire POC process in the sense that, you know, when you're relating maybe other experiences or other approaches based on other customers and so on, and it gives you license to talk about other successes. And doing that, sometimes a little bit of drama or intrigue is important in telling the story. Now, we all know that not all stories are the same. Some are exciting and others just downright dull. Now, you can probably know by my reference to Raiders, maybe what my age is and so on, and I chose that as a great story. There are many other great stories and movies out there. And you know, that story and Raiders of the Lost Ark was told with a lot of drama and intrigue and mystery and action. And I think that that's important to do when you're bringing a POC to a close and you're trying to sell the customer that, hey, we did the POC really well and we did it better than the competition. Now, I've sometimes seen a POC brought to a close with just a simple, and I would say boring email or quick call. And I don't think that that's effective or the best way to close out a POC. Instead, I think we need to be ready to have a meeting which has some flair and action in it. So when we're telling this story around our solution and how well it went, we need to have more than just the facts and figures. Statistics alone aren't compelling enough to draw people in, but if you convey those facts and figures in a storytelling manner, then dull facts and figures come to life. Now, I'm not saying that you should hire a Hollywood movie crew to tell your story, but I am suggesting that you need to spark up how we tell a story. As sales engineers, we need to add a little bit of drama, a little bit of mystery, some intrigue, and how we relate how well the POC was done. And the way that we do this is use sort of the 5 key elements of a compelling story. And what are those elements? You can see them on the screen. First of all, there's be able to know and identify the characters that were involved in the POC. There's you, there's the customer, there's maybe other people involved from the department or a team. You need to understand and relate what the setting was and the situation for the POC. So all those things about business outcomes and understanding the bigger picture come into play, and having the customer write out what their business objectives are. You need to know what the main plot of the POC is, like meaning what drove the POC to occur in the first place, and what were the points of conflict. Obviously, what things weren't working or working at all or working well with the customer. And of course, the really important thing is, how did you and your team and your technology and your approach bring the resolution to this overall situation? In essence, you're sort of the hero of the story in the sense of helping the customer resolve this situation. Now, how we convey the success of a POC needs to be done with a compelling story. I think it needs to include believable plots, strong characters and heroes, and occasionally a villain or two. But one thing we have to keep in mind is that we always have to draw the customer into this story and how we tell it. It isn't just about me and the great technology and company that I happen to work for. Really, the central character of a POC is always how the customer wins and how their situation is improved. So although our technology and team is engaged, obviously we're doing much of the heavy lifting during a POC, we really need to keep the customer at the center of the story and their success in terms of being the main theme of how we convey the value of this. So habit 6, I believe that the outcome of habit 6 is that when we capture the experience, we're able to tell it in a captivating manner so that the customer further can see themselves in our story, in our solution. All right, we're on the final habit, and the final habit I've termed relationship. And this is the habit of nurturing relationships. It's really all about knowing and relating to your customer on a human or personal level. I think we need to make it our objective to know our customers thoroughly as people. A POC, we know inherently isn't just about technology. People today still want to buy from people, because they want a level of personal engagement, which helps them relate and understand at times complex solutions. Now, how you relate to people, treat them and respect them is important. The old adage of, we should treat people as we want to be treated ourselves still holds true. When customers sense that they can relate or even trust you, even during POC engagement, you gain the opportunity to learn more about their situation, sometimes the politics and projects that you would otherwise not be able to learn about. With a relatable approach, I think we have the opportunity to get more on the inside track and not just know sort of the bare facts of what is going on. I've always had to work at leveraging every engagement with customers to nurture a respectful professional relationship. I was coached by some great sales leaders that, Tony, never waste a meaningful engagement to grow your relationship and build trust. It's not just about an email. It's not just about a phone call. It's not just about a meeting. Leverage each of those moments to get to know them and convey the information that helps them align and sort of get a sense that working with you is the best possible decision that they can make. Now, when it comes to relationships, I know there's been many books, videos, and courses that we can go to on how to build relationships. I suspect that we've all read a book or two on this topic. I've always found great value in reading these books because it's helped me balance the technical bent that many sales engineers have. The main point I want to make to sales engineers is that for the time being, we continue to engage with people in a POC. I haven't heard of a POC yet being run using artificial intelligence or bots. That day may be coming, but for today, we're still dealing with people. Now, in all of this, when we're building relationships, we really need to be acted and seen as being trustworthy. In the context of a POC, I believe trust is about being consistent in what you say and what you do. There are many things which can be done in a POC. I think that we as sales engineers have to resist the habit to agree to everything, but still being able to deliver on what we say we can do. And I think this is especially important in a POC when it relates to a new customer, because I think we're often getting measured about, are we being consistent? There's always an evaluation that's being there's always an evaluation that's being done, especially with new customers when they don't know you. So there's a lot more aspects around this value of authentic relationship building during a POC, but we all know that people will buy and transact from people that they can relate to and trust. So in this final habit, I believe that the benefit of focusing on growing relationships with a customer during a POC is that it aids in nurturing a human to human or person to person engagement. I think that's always been important. I think these days it's even more important. So that brings to a close the 7 habits. Here they are again. I believe that these approaches add value to the POC process. And now I also realize that there could be other habits used by you, the audience. It would be great to get some feedback from you via some emails or text or what have you to hear what other approaches and such that you have. If you're wanting to do that, there's some contact information for me. And again, with my intended release of the book, if you send me an email using the bit.ly code there or the QR code, I'm offering a significant discount on the book as well. But anyway, I'd be more than good to hear from people in terms of other approaches and so on. As I wrap up this session, I really hope that this has sparked your curiosity and interest to consider how else POCs can be improved. I'd like to thank you for your attendance. And again, if you want to reach out to me, I'd be glad to hear from you. So thank you again for attending. Continued success in your sales engineering career, and stay safe, everyone.
Thanks so
Brian,
much, Tony.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. Let's chat some claps for Tony on a great presentation. There was a ton of valuable information, a lot of takeaways. So that was a great presentation to hear. We really appreciate it. We have just a couple of minutes for Q&A, so we're going to try to get through as many as we can for you guys. But again, if we aren't able to get to it, make sure to connect with Tony, and you can reach out to him with some of your questions and thoughts and ideas around perfecting the proof of concept. So to get started, there were a decent amount of questions about how you define a proof of concept, where a lot of people see it meaning different things, and how would you distinguish it from an actual pilot?
Yeah, I mean, I could only speak from my experience. I mean, in the context with the organizations that I've worked with, Brian, a pilot we tend to define as something that's done more by our professional services organization. So some people would call that a little bit of a pre-implementation or, an implementation of sorts, right? That might be throwaway and so on. So in a pilot, although it looks very similar to a POC, I just distinguish that a POC is done by a sales engineer. It has more of a limited scope. Pilot can have a broader scope in terms of what's tested, what's implemented. For us, a pilot tends to be things that involve performance testing, and in context of how we conduct POCs, we don't always allow or include performance testing just by some of the environments that are set up. It doesn't always meet customers' requirements because it's sort of not their hardware environment that they're using.
Perfect. I think that's great. A lot of questions were surrounding where the POC is kind of pushed forward by the by the AE, where the SE might not necessarily have time to do the full validation of why and set some of those things up. What advice do you have around that type of situation, or potentially helping to avoid that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think part of this, you have to step back from the issue and sort of ask, how a proof of concept is viewed beyond the sales engineer and the sales rep or account executive, and ask the question, does your organization sort of have a position on how POC should be run? For example, what's the qualification process that you go through? Yes, the sales engineer and the sales rep are speaking to the customers, and there's a sense that a POC is a requirement, and that's all fine. I mean, that's a natural and sort of required engagement that should be occurring with the customer. But the question is do you have checkpoints to talk about that internally? Are there checkpoints to talk about it with sales engineering or sales management about, yeah, it all sounds good around this POC, but are there discussions that are held internally to further qualify that? So, what I've sought to do is to just have guidelines and processes in place to just have points where people can connect internally and relate what's happened and get somebody else's opinion or viewpoint on it, so that you can just sort of have a discussion and collaboration on it. So we found that implementing good guidelines and processes and checks sort of helps that situation. I referred to in my presentation sort of taking that pause and slowing down and sort of taking 3 breaths, as it were, and that's what I'd recommend you do. Don't be in a rush to always say yes. There's actually more value in slowing down and maybe taking a day or two to respond back to the customer about if or how you're going to approach it.
That's great. So one of the questions that I thought was really good from Martin from the audience is how do you respond to, or what advice do you have for the guy that always wants to see one more thing in a proof of concept?
Yeah, well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, that personality is there. I mean, this is a bit of a personal thing. I mean, I don't think that you can sort of, I think what you have to do is sometimes you just have to sort of have, as it were, a coffee meeting with that individual to maybe understand what's driving all the questions, as it were, right? Sometimes I think it's based on an element of fear that, man, if I don't get this list of 20 things to Tony, I'll never see them, right? And so there's part of this thing where you have to maybe just engage this individual maybe on a one-off situation and try and understand what's their motivation, what's their role. There could be actually a lot of good reasons why they're wanting to see so many things. Now, one of the things that has worked for us is sometimes we'll actually accept that long list of things they want to see, but we'll hive it off into more of a demo where we can show them that list of 20 things that they're really concerned about, but we won't necessarily include those 20 things in the POC. Does that make sense? So we'll show it to them, but we won't make it part of the POC so it doesn't sort of slow things down. Sometimes that works.
Yeah, I like that. I think that makes sense. So
Yeah.
last question, we only probably have about a minute or less, is where POCs can often have a high cost, as you mentioned. What advice do you have to manage the limit the costs, but still maintain prospect satisfaction?
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm working on and trying to sort of get a better sense of. I would admit, don't do a great job of sort of tracking the cost. Like I don't count the hours necessarily that go to a POC. I mean, I think one of the things, most organizations have a CRM system, and hopefully their SCs are inputting their time. I think for every solution it will, or every organization, it will vary a bit. But if you have a sense that, a particular solution that you might be POCing should only take, a week or two or a certain number of hours, then leverage your CRM system and the activity tracking and sort of keep track of that. This goes a little bit to that scope creep, if you feel that something should take a week and it's taking 4, well, that could be a good indication. So just using your internal CRM systems might be a good way of tracking how well a POC is progressing.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Tony, for a great presentation. We really appreciate your time, and thanks for all the attendees. Just as a heads up, the next sessions that are coming up is track 1, 3 ways pre-sales must evolve in a product-led world with Rob Falcone, and the case study from Brian Oling, scaling pre-sales with intelligent demo automation. So appreciate your time today. Look forward to seeing you in the next session. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye.